What is up, everybody, and welcome back to the Small Lake City Podcast. I'm your host, Eric Nilsson, and we're in for a real treat for episode number 22. Our guest this week, his name is Geoff Davis. He is the CEO of the Sorensen Impact Institute, which is built into the University of Utah. It's located in the Eccles Business Building. But what he does and what social impact is he has built his entire career around it about investing into developing areas, helping solve social causes and some of the biggest dilemmas in helping some of our most vulnerable people around the world, has traveled around the world and worked so hard to make people's lives better to the point where he was knocking on death's door. And that experience helped him prioritize his life, prioritize his relationships, and really think about what the life that he wanted to live from there on out. And where he moved back and had a couple great projects that he worked around in the Salt Lake City area, but now is working on both things locally and domestically and internationally. So lots of great information, lots of great learnings from him. Super smart person that has solved some of the biggest problems and there's a lot to learn from him. So yeah, let's hear from Geoff, his story, and some of the takeaways that we can learn from him.
Okay, Geoff. Yeah, this is what I'm like. So it's so fun because you have such an interesting story because there's a handful of people that, you could throw them in the broad context of entrepreneur, investor. Cool. But there's so much more to it. I don't know how familiar you are with Scott Paul. Maybe not, two very different worlds, actually very different worlds. But he kind of is a person that falls in that same category. With you, it's always been someone who's been focused on impact, focused on making a difference, focusing on creating products for people to help make a difference and go from there. So honestly, excited to hear more of your story, how it all came to be, because I know I've seen part of it because we worked together for a little bit of time, but then there's the whole how you got there and kind of what you've been up to now at Sorensen. Just to get things started, you are, correct me if I'm wrong, one of 8 kids from your family, the oldest. Job. Yeah. And so where were you growing up? What was life like in that crazy household?
So it's interesting. I actually just wrote an article in Forbes about a little bit of this. It was pretty nutty, in a good way. Yeah. But we were very active, all of us, with tons of sports. I did 5 sports in high school, and my siblings did similar things, and then dancers and cheerleading and whatever. That was in Davis, California. I sometimes joke that they knew I was going to go on to such great things that they named the city after me, but 100 years before I got there. But actively engaged. My mom was always doing something in the community, formal and informal. She was always on some council, some committee, something at the school and at the city, the town. But we also always had homeless people with us for Thanksgiving, or, some old lady from the community with us at Christmas, or, things like that. And taking it back a bit, just if we want to go back a bit, my grandfather was one of the people that helped start the Peace Corps. He had done some speech writing, had done some work with Kennedy. And then when they started the Peace Corps, he helped out with that. And he oversaw Asia, the Peace Corps.
Oh, wow.
And my mom spent part of her time growing up in Malaysia and the Philippines. And so I heard a lot of those stories and kind of had that ethos, imbued in me and in us growing up. And then my dad was a corporate attorney, an international corporate attorney doing structured transactions around the world. And so I kind of heard that part. And then as you alluded to earlier, I got the entrepreneurial bug really young. Go ahead.
I was going to say, that's so interesting, those two backgrounds, right? Because you have your mother and her family that are so interested in giving back, being founder of the Peace Corps, being involved there. That obviously trickled down to her to being wanting to be involved in the community and where she is. And also, going back to that Forbes article, it's leave it better than you found it.
Exactly.
And it seems like that's kind of was that ethos that they were living by at that point.
Totally.
And then we'll get into more of the details of why this kind of compounds better. But then you have your father, who's this attorney, who then was probably a lot of the motivation towards, microfinance and a lot of stuff he did with Unitas from there.
Yeah. And in many ways, he just opened my world to global business, basically. Yeah. I'd hear him come back he was just in Sweden negotiating some transaction, or he's just in Israel, or he's just in Ireland, or, whatever. And so I knew I wanted to do something globally. And I started a couple small businesses when I was young. I sometimes halfway joke that my first one was I bought I bought a tub of red vines from the equivalent of Costco, and I sold at retail at school, and they probably each licorice probably cost me 2 cents a piece, and I sold them for whatever, 20 cents a piece. And, I was loving it. And until the principal found out and called me in and told me to stop. And then I'm like, that's it. Libertarian. Free market. And no, but I started lawn mowing companies and little things like that. And then, and I actually started 3 businesses in undergrad. I was thinking of going to school in California. That's where I was raised. And my dad wanted to take me on a trip out here. I was a racer in high school, a ski racer. Mm-hmm. And so he thought, let's go ski in Utah. And so we came, and I toured the BYU campus and thought it was beautiful. And the skiing was fantastic. And I also thought the girls were totally cute.
Check.
Exactly. It's in a beautiful place, beautiful women, and, incredible skiing. So that's where I originally came here. And I thought, I played rugby in high school. I played rugby at BYU, actually.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And my, I had this warped conception of what BYU meant. Like I don't know how serious I was, but I kind of halfway thought like the Mormon Tabernacle Choir was piped through the halls and everybody's all reverent and, whatever.
It's like a sacrament meeting.
Yeah,
all the time.
Exactly. I go, I'm not sure I really want to go there. So I walked into the rugby office there, and I think what was playing, I should remember this. Either Welcome to the Jungle or Highway to Hell or something was playing, this rock music was playing. Like, okay, my conceptions were totally misformed.
It's so funny.
So loved it. Loved BYU. Started 3 businesses at BYU. And in the process also started learning about this thing called international development, that, there are purposeful ways of helping countries and economies and societies develop. And there are groups around the world that purposefully engage in that type of activity. I started learning that and thought that was super cool.
Yeah.
And so I want to know more, because maybe there's something I can do there with business to kind of help things grow, but I didn't know what. And one of my professors said, well, if you're serious about this, you need to go get a job at one of the best consulting firms in Washington, D.C. and go, work on some projects and really do this. So I did that the next summer. I moved to D.C. and got a job at a place called Chemonics, which is now it's probably like $3 billion a year consulting firm doing international development projects. Actually, you want a little digression that's a little bit fun? Just kind of the entrepreneurial side. Okay. So I said to my professor, who are the best ones? And he gave me the names. And so I started calling them. Chemonics was supposed to be the best at the time. So I called Chemonics and I said, I want to come work for you this summer. I want to do this, learn about this international development thing. And I want to come work for you. They said, that's great. The only interns we have master's degrees, or they're getting their master's degrees, or they're in grad school. Yeah, I'm probably a sophomore or junior in college. And I said, well, I'm really interested. Can I call you back in a little bit? And so then I went and learned more about their projects, and I called back and I said, I saw the work you did on the Aswan Dam in Egypt. And, I just started engaging them. And so I started calling, this is kind of pre-internet. I started calling them about every month-ish, and then every 3 weeks, and then every 2 weeks, and just getting to know this person who would be the hiring manager. And then finally, I packed my stuff and got in my car and started driving across the country. And I called this woman named Hester Obi, who I'd been talking with. And I said, I'm in Chicago and I'm going to be in DC in 2 days. I would love to meet with you at 10 a.m. to talk about a job there. And she said, what? And I said, yeah, I told you I'm moving to DC and working at a consulting firm this summer. So I'd love to come talk with you. She said, yeah, okay. So I show up, Tuesday at 10 a.m. or whatever. And I come in and her assistant meets me and brings me. He said, "Oh, so you're the infamous Geoff Davis? Okay,
you're our monthly caller,
exactly, stalker, exactly." So she brings me into her office and we start talking. And 20 minutes later, she offered me a job, not an internship, a job. I was paid.
That's amazing.
As an undergraduate, and my job, it's like worse than get the coffee. my job was I was the database maintainer for the resume database they had for all the consultants around the world for these consulting projects. So, somebody would have to update their resume for the next project that Chemonics was bidding on. And so all these resumes would come in and I'd have to scan them into the database. I mean, it was not totally mindless, but pretty close.
Yeah.
But I didn't care because I was there and I wanted to learn.
You got your internship at your consulting firm.
Exactly. And I said to her, well, they do these brown bags every Thursday and Friday. I'm going to go spend an hour and a half listening to the brown bags where the project teams would talk about their projects. And so I learned a ton. And I kind of became known as the kid who's at every single one of these things.
Just a sponge on the front row.
Exactly. And one time there was a project there was a project in Morocco that needed some French translation, and I spoke French. And so I said, I can do it. And so I translated this document that it was a UN document talking about NGOs in Morocco. And I translated it from French to English, and it ended up getting, someone said, oh, this is one of the best translations we've seen or something like that. So it became known that I spoke French.
Like, that's our database.
Yeah. That's our database analyst, or not even analyst, or database peon. And then like a week or two later, the team that had been working in Burundi, Africa, was evacuated because of the Burundi massacre. And there's a French-speaking countries, and they needed some help. And they said, Geoff, don't you speak French? And I sat up in my seat. Yes, sir, I do. And so they handed me like a 4-inch stack of documents, and all in French. And they said, this is talking about something called the informal economy or the microeconomy. Read all of these and figure out what's going on and why the microeconomy has stalled there. And so then I went back to Hester, who had hired me, and I said, I've just been asked to join this project. And she rolled her eyes. She said, I knew this was going to happen. Of course you can go. That's the whole point, Yeah. And the crazy thing is she kept paying me while I was working on this other project. So I did that. And I was reading through all this stuff. And I came back to my manager and I said, I figured it out. Nothing is happening because nothing is happening.
Genius.
He said genius. Exactly. But there really was truth to that, meaning I had figured out that nothing at the micro level, nothing could happen because everything was so interdependent. The insight I finally got was I was trying to understand all these people that used to sell Coca-Cola on the corner. You've been there, you've seen, they just stand on the corner trying to sell water or Coca-Cola. They weren't doing that activity because they didn't have the Coke or the water, and the Coke or the water suppliers weren't delivering because the tires had been burned off their trucks and they didn't have money to get new tires, and the tire people didn't have new rubber to make new tires. I mean, the whole thing had kind of just ground to a halt.
Yeah.
And he said, genius, thank you. And I said, no, really. And I explained to it, look, every little thing is interconnected at this level of the economy. And so when it grinds to a halt, it grinds to a halt. So what we can do is, what if we inject capital? What if we inject money into these super small businesses so that they can start trading amongst themselves and it can percolate up instead of top down?
Yeah. Because all of a sudden you have the guy on the street who's like, hey, I can actually buy Coke and
exactly.
water. Okay, well, we can now afford
exactly.
Just kind of, it's like, yeah, interesting.
Totally. And so he said, that actually is a good idea. Figure out how to do that. Because we have no people on the ground now. The countries have been kind of shut down because it's civil war.
Yeah, totally.
And so I went back and tried to learn some more and did some thinking. And I came back with this idea. I found a local credit union that was still operating. And I said, what if we give a loan guarantee to this credit union to give out loans to small businesses that aren't even credit union members or whatever else? And he said, that might actually work. I think, this is funny, this is probably 1994, 95. He said, I think there's a bank in India or maybe Bangladesh that does something like this kind of lends money to small businesses. I think John over on the such and such team might have visited them one time. Go talk to him. Mm-hmm. And so I go talk to this John guy, and he says, yeah, it's called Grameen or Grameen. I think it's Grameen Bank. So I mean, this is how much it was infant stage. And he described everything he knew about the Grameen Bank in 5 minutes, basically. I think they give loans, and I think they somehow get women into groups of, 4 or 10 or something people. So they co-guarantee. That's about as much as I know. So anyway, I tried to learn what I could. And anyway, we ended up getting some money from USAID. I think it was like $165 million or something to do loans into Burundi to get things started back in. Don't quote me on that number. It's been a while, but in the process, I learned, oh my gosh, this is amazing. So these small businesses, so you can help small businesses grow. That's entrepreneurship. They decide what they want to do. It's financing, it's capital, it's helping people help themselves. It's a hand up, not a hand out, all these things. I'm like, oh, this is cool. I want to do this. So I went back to school for my last year and wrote a senior paper on basically a business plan for a self-sustaining microcredit program. Yeah. And then said, I'm going to go try this. So I I started a translation company based on doing that work in Morocco and whatever. Eventually started a translation company, sold that, used some of that money and some other money to start a microcredit program in Mexico to try this out and see how it would actually work.
Was what was going on in Mexico and like their microeconomy similar to what you had found in Africa? Because like with Africa, I'd assume, again, you could go and be like, all right, government, top down, here's your capital, but in corruption, everything, probably not going to make much down there. But then if you can start to inject it at the individual level, the entrepreneurial level, then it starts to bubble up more without that filter. And I imagine, I'm trying to think about my Mexican history, what was going on around then, but I imagine Mexico was in a similar situation.
It actually wasn't. It was just close.
It was close enough.
No, I mean, it was just close geographically. It was like the easiest place to get to for me to go try these ideas.
You can travel to Africa or you can travel to Mexico.
And then create one more fun entrepreneurial thing, which you could also argue is lack of a prefrontal cortex or something, because I'm on the plane on the way down to Mexico. This sounds so dumb. It had to be more sophisticated than this, but it's the way I tell the story. I'm like, wait a sec, I don't speak Spanish. Wait, I don't know where I'm sleeping tonight. I'm like on my way to Mexico City to start this thing.
Just so excited. Anyway, like, oh, wait a minute, there's a couple of details I forgot.
Figured it all out. But anyway, So anyway, that was kind of long roundabout way, but I wanted to tie in the BYU.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Or Utah and how I first came here.
No, I love that spirit of saying, because I feel like that gets lost a lot today in like the job search of being like, hey, like I want this. I'm going to show you that I want this. I'm going to show up and do this. And it's kind of turned into this culture of I'm going to submit a resume to this LinkedIn job and cross my fingers. Yeah. When really it's like that. It's not really how you get jobs now nor then. But if you can prove your value, prove your worth. Because like there's a quote that someone I used to work with would always say is like, and it's mostly in the context of like getting into a tech company that you want to. It's like, it doesn't matter the seat. As long as you get on the rocket ship, you're there. You can change seats when you get there. And just like with you, you're like, I don't care what I'm doing. I don't care if I'm an intern. I don't care if it's a job. This job, sure, I will scan resumes all day. But then all of a sudden it's like, hey, we'll give you an at-bat for this, or we'll give you a chance. And then all of a sudden you just start to edge away and be like, oh, actually, 100%. You just wrote this idea for how we're going to improve this economy. And they're like, actually, let's try it out. And sure, let's go invest. I mean, around $165 million through this other sovereign bank that's going to pipe the money. Like, I didn't do anything like that when I was in college. I did intern in DC. It was at the Treasury. I did pretty much nothing. There you go. It was as bad as it was this battle of, oh, you can't do that. You don't know enough context. Okay, well, what about that? Well, you're not going to be here long enough that it makes sense to hand you. I'm like, okay,
go get my dry cleaning, will you?
More like we're going to go on another 2-hour lunch because there's nothing for us to do either. Oh man, but it was fine. I learned that I did not want to work in the government.
There you go.
So you have this hypothesis that you validated in Africa, and then you said, I can do this on my own. This microfinancing in Mexico. I mean, what did you find from there? Did it work in that similar situation? Well, not similar situation, but that close situation in providing that? So my guess is at your point, you're like, wait, this might be a little bit more of a universal concept than it is based on these very niche situations that we're encountering. So what was your thoughts at that point, or what was your next steps?
So my next steps, I actually, so the guy who earlier I acted as if everybody knows what Grameen Bank is. I should mention that. So Grameen Bank invented, the founder of Grameen Bank, a man named Muhammad Yunus, who won the Nobel Prize eventually, he invented this way of doing micro lending, of lending to small businesses or individuals to help them grow a business and work their way out of poverty in Bangladesh in the 70s after a very bad, they had a civil war and then drought and famine and a whole bunch of things going on. And he figured out this way of doing it, basically giving out small $50 loans, $25 loans, $100 loans, so that somebody could do something that could generate income, and then they'd pay the money back with the income and then get a larger loan and grow, buy another cow to sell more milk or whatever, buy more chickens, whatever they were doing. And so I had met him as an undergraduate, And then in 1997, there was the first ever microcredit summit held, which was back when microcredit was just becoming a thing in Washington, D.C. And so I decided after doing this thing in Mexico that I was going to go to that. And so I went and met Muhammad Yunus, met him again and told him what I had done in Mexico. And he said, that's amazing. We're thinking of starting something here in the United States. You have to meet so-and-so and see if you can help. And so he introduced me to this person named Alex Counts, who was moving from Bangladesh to the U.S. to start Grameen Foundation. And I ended up saying, I'm in. And so I was living in California when I was doing the thing in Mexico. I moved from California to D.C. to help start the Grameen Foundation, help Muhammad Yunus, this Nobel laureate, start the Grameen Foundation in Washington, D.C. And did that for about 3 years. And basically with that, we created microcredit programs all around the world based on what Grameen was doing in Bangladesh. And so I learned a ton.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you're learning from the guy who started it all.
Exactly.
It's what a fun little chain of events that get you, a seat at the table at so many, important, Nobel Prize winning people doing the things that exactly you set out to do.
Totally, exactly. And picking this up?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Here you go.
And then I went to graduate school and I studied this and I wanted more sort of formalized business skills. And I also wanted to understand how microfinance was actually working and what was happening in people's lives. Was it really helping, et cetera? And then coming out of that, I, with a group of other people, started a company called Unitas. And we were the first ones to do microfinance at scale. We just figured out how to just really grow it fast. At the time when we started, there was like a 90% supply demand gap, 10% market penetration. So we wanted to change that. And so we figured out we used venture capital, investment banking, and strategy consulting skills and teams to find microfinance companies and then just supersize them. We turned them into for-profit companies, put the pedal to the metal, and just grow like crazy. So we had about we went from 0 to 15 million microloans around the world in about 7 years.
Wow.
In a bunch of different countries.
And with that, so it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but so you're investing into these entities within the countries that then would
grow within the country.
Yeah, grow within the country. So it's not like you're the ones directly investing in all the, okay.
Yeah. We invested and helped them scale, but they ran it locally, basically.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And then you would also, on the strategy consulting part of things too, would you be pretty boots on the, well, I guess probably not at that point. You'd be helping on, you would be helping. We had teams that could,
because they had, I don't know how much detail you want to go into, but back then, microfinance was all nonprofit. It was all done. It was funded by the World Bank and the Ford Foundation and things like that. And it was funded into nonprofits. So we had to convert these nonprofits into for-profit finance companies, and the consulting team helped with that. And then we found that there were at least 3 key things to really grow super fast. One was a management information system, kind of an IT loan tracking system, et cetera. One was building middle management leadership, and the other was really efficiency around the front lines and being hyper efficient in the delivery of the product and getting them. Because this is not like today where you do, everyone has a phone and you do peer-to-peer lending. This was like guys on motorcycles with baskets of money driving out an hour into rural India to hand out money to people under a tree and then getting the payments back and driving back. So it was like, it's not bits and bytes. It was atoms. It was things like actually moving around.
Well, it sounds so stressful because obviously if you're working, traditional, let's say private equity, venture capital, whatever, you're injecting capital in large amounts to, if you're, Blake at Pelion and you're like, I'm going to go write $100 million check to Divvy, how much money you're writing them. You have a seat on the board. You're going to go buy quarterly, make sure everything's going out. But then you go in this third world developing country, $50 for you, $100 for you. And so you're like, we need to make sure we're tracking this.
Exactly.
We need to make sure that we can do this and we'll train and upscale you. Yeah. And then we're going to hit the pedal to the metal and we're going to make this grow. So it's nice that it's so cool to hear that you had this. It's almost like this playbook where you can say, okay, once we identify these regional banks that can disperse the capital, change it to for-profit, make this happen. And it seems like, again, going back to your hypothesis of Africa, India, and Mexico, those had already validated that. So then you get to this point where it's just like, let's scale it. Let's do this wherever we can, wherever we can make an impact and start to see the fruits of those labors. Yeah,
you've hit on it. We didn't do any product development, basically. We just found ones that already knew how to do it, but didn't know how to scale it.
Yeah.
So we scaled it. We just had the secret sauce was how to grow them. We grew about 180% a year.
Wow.
Yeah.
And in such and this is the thing too, is whenever I think of, impact investing in general, you're always going to be the first one to come to mind.
You need to broaden your network.
Working on it. But it's so interesting to see, and again, going back to your parents' example, right? You have your mother who wants you to leave it better than you found it, wants to support, developing places and people that need help. And then you have your father who's, let's call it the more pragmatic, more litigious, more, the paperwork side of things. Yeah. And you kind of have all of this going together. You have, these great experiences. You have this experience of international business that you had. And it just kind of sounds like everything, you're like the perfect candidate to make it happen from the day you were born. And it's so fun to hear in your voice, not just now, but in times I've heard you, there's so much passion behind it.
For sure. Because
that is what motivates you. And it's such a hard world in investing. And I think I've talked to you about this before, but when you take out the impact piece, usually you're going to make a better return. Mm-hmm. However, it's interesting to see once you can see the impact that you make, you're like, I'm still getting a return, but everything else is so much more important and so much more impactful than anything else. Like, I don't care about scaling a toothpaste company that's a D2C so I can go make 100x, but if I can support hygiene in rural Africa so that they don't die of these diseases that no one should have ever died from, that's a whole different investment thesis and
100%,
approach.
100%. Two thoughts on that. First, if you calculate, if you pretend like externalities is something that economists made up, and you say there's no such thing as externalities, but everything has impact, and so we need to account for it all instead of just the financial, then the returns look totally different when you think about impact investing. If you internalize the externalities or whatever you want to say. But the second point is, even absent doing that, we don't totally advertise the returns we had, but we had top quartile VC returns consistently on our investments. And these were helping the poorest people we could find, often illiterate, giving them $100 loans in the middle of nowhere. And we had north of 30% returns consistently.
Yeah, no one's going to complain about all of that. And I think the term that most people might be familiar with, and if not, it's like that double bottom line.
Totally.
We're not only are we generating a profit, but we're also generating an impact as well. And sometimes it's hard to get everything to a dollar impact of how you're going to measure things, apples to oranges to pears to plums. But it's always the thought that counts and doing a little bit more from there.
Totally.
And so, Unitas, it grew from this idea of how you can scale a lot of these microfinancing and help support a lot of people. But as that grew, did you still have that same appetite, or what were your goals after that? Did you still want to do that?
That's a good question. I will say one thing too, especially to tie it back. Unitas was got its early start in Utah, and then we moved the office to Seattle, where my partner and I were living and running it. Someone named Mike Murray, business partner, but we had a lot of support, both investors and donors, because Unitas was a hybrid. We had a for-profit arm and a nonprofit arm from Utah.
Got it.
And so a lot of this grew up. You could argue that even though when it became famous and did all its work, it was based in Seattle, it was really a Utah story and a Utah company. And I think we'll circle back to this. I think part of that is just growing out of the ethos here, which I know you want to talk about on the back end of this, but the ethos here of, most people in Utah want to do something good, great to make money, and want to do something good. So I think that's important. So when I left Unitas, I took some time off.
Do you want to talk about that at all, or not so much?
I don't know. What do you want to do?
It's interesting. Part of it's a unique part of your story, but I also know it's fairly personal. So
no problem. I'll do high level, and you can take it where you want. So the short of it, I was going to die.
TLDR, I was about to die.
Euphemism. I had some health issues. My body started shutting down. All my organs and systems were shutting down, and it took a while. It took 11 doctors to figure out what was going on. My adrenal glands were failing and not producing enough cortisol to regulate all my systems and things like that. So it took some time off to deal with that.
Because you were in almost bed rest for a year.
It was literally bed rest. Yeah, totally. I was sleeping 16 hours a day type of thing. And I was 30. How old was I at the time? Probably 37, 38.
So young.
But had been going hard, right? Had been doing this for 8 years. Global. We had global operations.
So much travel, so much stress. Just giving it your all.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, just over these last holidays, I wondered if I had kind of mythologized, how much travel it was and how hard it was and everything. But I look back at my wife kept a blog the whole time, and I looked back at it, and it really was. I was, 3 small kids, and I was gone 70% of the time. I was in India, I was in Geneva, I was in London, I was in San Francisco, I was in Kenya, I was, just Argentina, just gone. And anyway, so we took time off, moved to the south of France, as one does when they're going to die. Actually, not going to die. We didn't feel I was going to die. We knew the trajectory was that direction, but we figured we could catch it in time. They said we had about 8 weeks to fix things. And went through treatment, healing, recovery, did a lot of yoga, ate a lot of really not like fancy food, but like healthy food.
Yeah.
Part of the reason we moved there was natural vitamin D production was an important part of the healing process because it triggers some things within the endocrine system and other things that would help with the healing. And we figured, well, we could do that in San Diego or Hawaii, but we wanted to really just extract ourselves from everything and move away. So I lived on the Mediterranean, on the border of Italy, and on the Mediterranean in France.
I mean, what was going through your head at that time? Were you just kind of like, all right, just got to get through this other battle so I can go back to this? Or you're like, I need to rethink things? Or is it just kind of its own process in itself?
I mean, how deep do you want to go?
I mean, as deep as you'd like.
So there's a thing called the literature of the dying. It's a genre. It's usually parents writing letters to their kids when they have some terminal illness. So I read a lot of those, maybe all, I don't know if it's all of them, but I read a lot of those books. And like I said, I had this feeling that I was going to be okay. In fact, when I got the final diagnosis from the doctor, he told me, I have good news, bad news. Good news is we finally know what it is. The bad news is it's pretty serious and it's going to take quite a while to rebuild and to fix. But I pulled out a brand new moleskin notebook. And on the inside cover, I wrote The Road Back.
Oof.
And I just said that was just the start of my journal. And I wrote, the whole time going through it. But I spent some time, the reason I mentioned that literature of the dying, I spent some time looking at death and just really exploring, what do I think about it? What are my fears? Am I excited? How's my life been so far?
It's like an interesting thing to process. Like when because it's one thing to think about death theoretically, but when you're so sick, you can see like the path of like
totally. If we did nothing, I have 7-8 weeks left.
Yeah,
exactly.
And like you're faced with it. I mean, that puts you in a whole different context of.
100%.
So I love that the first thing you do is like, I need to write all of this down.
Yeah. So I spent a lot of time just, process, a lot of time sleeping, frankly, like I said. And we were super careful with my diet. We had to be careful with my diet. But my first thing was trying to process what was going on and trying to process my emotions. I had young kids. I had kids that were 8, 6, and 4 at the time. And then once, so I'm going to skip forward, but, going through all of that, once it was clear that I really was going to make it, then I was figuring out, okay, I'm assuming I'm going to come out of this. How do I want to come out of this? And I was already a good person. We've told the story and I was trying to do good and all these types of things, but I became much more deliberate. I really figured, I really focused. I was a typical type A entrepreneur, get it done, whatever has to be done, push. I don't have time to be sick. I'll be sick when I'm dead. It just take some Benadryl and get on the plane or whatever. And I realized a couple of things. One thing, I'll just pick up on the physical side of things. I had trained myself to do the hard thing physically, mind over matter, push through, stay up all night, write the report, whatever it is, take the red eye and make the meeting and whatever, to the point where the hard thing had become the easy thing. I was so used to it. I was so driven, et cetera, that doing the quote unquote hard thing had become the easy thing. And I realized what was really hard was taking a nap. What was really hard was saying no to that next opportunity.
Yeah.
And so I developed this thing, this philosophy that I've now shared in other places called protect the asset. And I just realized we are biological organisms. We're not mechanical. We can't just push. We can push for some time, but there is a limit.
Yeah.
There is a finite limit somewhere. And we're also, especially knowledge workers or people who, we're not actually digging things, but even the diggers, even people that are physically doing things, we are the assets. In the industrial age, the assets were machines for the most part of some sort. In this age, we are the assets. The knowledge workers are the assets. In the industrial age, we would invest in the assets, right? You take the whatever, you take the printing press offline for a little bit to oil it and replace this gear and do whatever. You proactively maintain it because that's the thing creating value. Well, we're the things creating value now, but we don't take any time off.
Yeah.
We say, oh, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And yet we sprint for the whole marathon.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? What do sprinters do at the end of a 40-yard dash? They fall down.
Yeah.
We don't fall down. We just keep going. Or what does the NBA do at the end of the season? They take an off season. We don't. We just keep going.
Everybody has a break.
Totally. But, drivers, we tend to just push. And so anyway, I came up with this idea of protect the asset and just really proactively investing and being as purposeful and strategic and what's the right word? Disciplined, if you will, in self-maintenance as we are or I am in other aspects of my life. So I started doing yoga. I mean, it used to be, I was so frenetic, so pushing that yoga, I would joke.
Yeah, I got to have time for yoga. I got to go work.
Exactly. So, oh yeah, imagine me holding, downward dog for 30 seconds. And now I have a daily yoga practice. I've been doing it for probably 10 or 11 years. I meditate. I purposefully, if one of my kids or my wife called right now, I'd take the call.
Yeah.
In the middle of meetings or whatever. I turn things off. I say, okay, I'm done at whatever time I decide, 8 o'clock, 6 o'clock, whatever time what I'm working on. Try not to do things on the weekend. So anyway, that's one learning. Second learning, and it sounds trite because people say it all the time, but I felt it so deeply, and that's the importance of relationships. Mm-hmm. And just really, okay, if they're really important, like when you're staring things in the face and you're like, okay, what matters? If I were to leave the earth now, what matters? And the importance of relationships and truly making priority shifts to put the relationships in an important place, not just say it.
Right. Yeah. Talk is so cheap. And that's one thing I've come to terms because I'm very intentional about who has access to me, who has energy, who I give energy to. And if there's anyone, let's say I'm trying to build a relationship with someone I haven't seen in a while, I think there's a value alignment, would get along. And it's my biggest pet peeve is I don't have time. I'm okay, can you just rephrase that and say this isn't
important enough for me?
Yeah, this isn't a priority.
Right.
Because that's fine. It's fine. Not everything can be a priority. Not everything can be super important. But I love that you had this realization. You're hey, something has to change in my life. Because you can't just be okay, I'm near death experience, bounce back, be all right, well, on a plane to Bangladesh, see you, and then just find yourself in the same place years or even worse later from there. And I had a not nearly the magnitude of experience, but I remember when I was doing investment banking in Seattle, and there was a time I was working on this pitch deck. It was 3:30 in the morning. I look at the clock. I look at myself. I'm what am I doing? What am I doing? I'm miserable.
Right.
I've never been in a darker place in my life. Mm-hmm. But I think it's important for people to understand those limits. Mm-hmm. Because again, like you said, we're biological creatures. We are finite of how much energy we have, how much energy we can spend, and go from there. And so for me, for now, now in my life, because of those experiences in the past, I know I'm okay, cool. I have to work out every day or else I start to get agitated easily, start to hard focus. I meditate every day because I have to check in on myself and make sure I'm doing it. I stretch every day because if there's one thing I've learned in the elderly, it's mobility is very important. And if I can have that habit now, then I can do it. And the consistency over time is what does it. And one thing also on that note of kind of your priorities that I've always kind of seen from an outside eye in is your authentic relationship with your family in particular. Because when we were working together, I remember your daughter would come in sometimes and it was so interesting to hear how much you knew about what was going on in her life, but also things that she was interested in. I remember there was I think there's a walkout at school or something, or some sort of, oh my gosh.
Was it Fridays for the Future?
The
eco protests?
Yes. Yeah, and just all these things, of course I'm going to support doing this. Of course I love it. It's so interesting to see how that has changed. Like you've talked about your behavior of not wanting to work on weekends, turning everything off at a certain time. And I think there's something to be learned from that, especially, being literally recording at the University of Utah. I remember walking these halls and being I'm going to be an investment banker. I'm going to work so hard. I'm going to be the CEO. I'm going to do all this. And then you reach your point, wait, I'd rather have a meaningful life that I want with the people that I want to be there than have these coffers of money and be alone at this penthouse apartment and can't do anything about it.
100%. I heard a story recently. Someone said, there was this fisherman in Mexico that was out fishing, and as he was bringing his boat in, a tourist saw him bringing his boat in, and it was 11:30 in the morning, and the tourist said, "So how'd it go?" And the fisherman showed him his two big fish, two fish that he caught, not huge like Old Man in the Sea, but just two fish. And And he said, "Oh, that's all there were out there?" And the fisherman says, "No, there are a lot more." And the tourist says, "Well, what are you going to do now?" He said, "I'm probably going to go home, have some coffee, take a nap, and then I think I'll play cards with my friends in the evening." And the tourist says, "Why don't you go out and get more fish?" And he says, "Why?" He says, "Because then you could sell more. And after a while, maybe you could get you could get an assistant to come out with you, and then you could catch more fish. And after doing that for a while, you could get another boat. And then after doing that for a while, you could get some more boats. And eventually, like 10 or 15 years from now, you could sell the whole company." Mm-hmm. And the fisherman says, "And then what would I do?" And he says, "I don't know, maybe take a nap and then play cards with your friends." And the fisherman says, "Have a nice day."
Yeah, exactly. It's so fun. Like I've seen so many things like that recently. I feel people are starting to waken up to enjoy the life you want to and don't complicate it. Because even using the fisherman example, like say he does that. Every single step of those complicates life. Another step, another responsibility, another 15 minutes of your week that you need to do. 30 of those, and now you don't even know how you got there.
Yeah. Let me mention one other thing before I go on, if that's okay.
Please.
One other thing I learned that may be helpful for people, hopefully will be. When I got my diagnosis and was sorting through all this, I was friends with the president of Xbox, and he told me he had not the same, but he had it was more. They knew it was short, but it was, I think, 3 months or 6 months, a health crisis, but they knew it was just had to be dealt with for a while. And he could only work, I don't remember, 10 hours a week or something like that. And he said to me, those 10 hours a week for those 6 months, that was the most productive I've ever been in my life. Because I was forced to prioritize. I was forced to use the 80-20 rule, which is a very real thing.
Oh, yeah.
A very, very real thing. The 80-20 rule is a real thing, whether it's 90-10, whatever. Just most things don't matter. In fact, quick side diversion if I can. Larry Summers. I was at this lunch with Larry Summers once. And he had been those things. So Larry Summers had been the president of Harvard. He had been the chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors for one of the presidents. He had been the secretary of Treasury, et cetera. I mean, he's like this big deal, right?
Yeah. Quite the pedigree.
He said, there are 3 things I've done that have mattered. And I'm sitting like, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
I could probably list 50.
Yeah.
And I said, what? And the only one I can remember was the Brady bonds, the Mexican peso crisis. He figured out this way to do this bond restructuring, credit default swap stuff that saved at least the hemisphere, if not the world, from a global financial contagion. And he said, but I just realized most things don't really matter. So anyway, that's a bigwig saying it. Here's me saying it also, that most things don't matter. Most things don't add the value that we think they do. And very, very few things add outsized value. So I also learned that in order to work, not work all night and all weekends and all whatever, I had to say no to a lot of things that wasn't going to add a lot of value, and then focus carefully on the things that did.
Yes.
Anyway, I just wanted to throw that in.
Prioritize and execute. That's
totally.
Like I have a friend who he will do anything that's in front of him.
Yeah.
But he will always end the day passed out, face down on a bed, shoes still on.
Yeah.
And I'm like, did you want to do all these things today? Like, do all these things matter? He's like, well, I just saw that it kind of needed to get done. I'm like, okay, maybe we should prioritize a little bit. Because again, then you can actually focus on the things that matter and do those well. And the other things like whatever, like MVP, like just do whatever I need to check the box, because it's not going to matter that much, and go from there.
Yeah.
So I love you have this experience. So you go from Unitas to taking this break in the south of France, which I mean, I would opt for the south of France
not
too.
A bad place.
Yeah, not a bad place at all.
Some of my friends said, "Man, I want what you've got."
Like, no, you don't. But you can stay in the south of France without it. So you bounce back. You have this new perspective and priority of life. I mean, where does that propel you to, or where are your priorities now that are feeling better and are ready to kind of be more of a participant than a spectator?
Yeah. So I knew even more. One of my friends, when I was able to work again, one of my friends approached me about starting a consulting firm that he had started. He had a couple of large contracts and wanted some help, that turned into one of the world's first social media agencies. Back when social media would just get going, and ended up doing, work for Porsche and the Gates Foundation. I mean, just big global organizations. Wow. And he ended up selling it, and it would have been incredible. And I said, I told him what I wanted to do. And he said, you're still on the Save the World track. So I was just kind of more the same, but better, smarter, and slower, not faster. And so then I was asked to, one of your questions you wanted to talk about is what brought me back to Utah. Mm-hmm. I was asked to move here and to help run the Perpetual Education Fund that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints had started a few years earlier, and given my background in lending and whatnot, and then to develop something called Self-Reliant Services, which the church started, which was an effort to help. The Perpetual Education Fund gave higher education loans in emerging markets for people that couldn't go to school otherwise. In most countries, there aren't higher education loan programs, government or otherwise. So if you don't have the money, you don't go to school. So the church started this program to help people go to college and beyond.
Oh, cool.
And they realized after a number of years that that's not enough in some countries. Like the Philippines, somebody flipping burgers at McDonald's has a college degree. And so in some places, it's not enough just to get an education. Yep. And they wanted to figure out what else can be done. So they started something called Self-Reliant Services. And I was asked to come help with that and help develop that. And so we started a micro enterprise boot camp, helping people start their own small business. We started about 50,000 small businesses a year around the world. And we helped about 20,000 people get better jobs. We taught people how to search for jobs and, scan the job market and network.
Tons of impact.
Yeah. It was great. In addition to giving about 20,000 higher education loans a year. Wow. So I was asked to do that. So came here. That's what brought us back here to Utah, and did that for 5 years. And then when that was done, took another round the world tour, traveled with the kids. We homeschooled for a year and we did fun stuff. We did learning things. Like we went to the Christmas markets in Europe, and we went to West Bank and spent time in Palestine and Israel. We spent time in Cambodia, living on a remote island. We opened a community center and taught English and opened a library on this super remote island in Cambodia. We surfed in New Zealand. We spent time in Africa.
Wow.
And so just all kinds of cool stuff.
And because I'd imagine at this point, so let's see. So if that was then when your kids were around there. So, they're probably, oldest is maybe like early teenager down to like 7 or 8?
No, they're older now. So what catalyzed this was our oldest was going to graduate from high school.
Oh,
so we wanted to do a trip and
just do a graduation trip.
But the crazy thing is, this is silly. I don't know if she'll ever listen to this, but we just pulled a silly parent thing. We're like, oh, we're going to go do this trip. Of course, we're all going to go. And she's like, wait, I want to graduate. I want to have my senior year here with my friends. Anyway, so she ended up halfway through the trip. She came home and she finished and graduated with her friends here, which is the right thing to do.
Oh, for sure. But still such a great, because I don't think I've ever traveled and walked away and been like, wow, I don't have an appreciation for another population of people, or I don't have an added perspective of how the world actually works. And it's similar to how you had this itch from an early age to understand this international development. Mm-hmm. It's so great for because don't get me wrong, classrooms are great, education's great, but that is so much more important and can actually help you understand better your place in the world and what to do after that than understanding. I can't even think of an example, but something trivial in a classroom.
Totally.
80-20 rule.
Which isn't trivial though.
Yeah, true. Which is not trivial.
We actually ended up homeschooling in France, going back in time, and we homeschooled for 9 years.
Oh, wow.
And as part of that, we traveled a lot. So we studied rainforests in Costa Rica, and we studied other things in Nicaragua, and we studied U.S. history by going up and down the East Coast, and we studied, Native American history in the Southwest, and we had done a bunch of those things. And so, but then in high school, they all went to high school as it became time. And so we thought, okay, we're going to do one last big family, thing. And she, like any rational teenager, said, I want to actually be with my friends my senior year.
Yeah. Definitely the way to do it. Yeah. So it's so fun that you do that. So you're at the church, you help stand up the Perpetual Education Fund and the reliability services and scale that.
Self-reliance
services.
And the Perpetual Education Fund had been started earlier. We just
help get a little bit more gas in the tank and sped up a little bit.
Yeah.
And so from there, so you were doing these projects with the church, and then is this when you had a chat with Randy?
That's when we met. Yeah,
okay,
exactly. Yeah. So my great friend, shout out to Randy Shumway. We were friends from graduate school. We were at Harvard together, and he had started a consulting firm called Cicero Group, which is here locally. He had actually started it in San Francisco, and moved it to Salt Lake City after, I can't remember how many years, 7 years. I'm going to make up the number, 7 years or something. Because lifestyle was better, cost of living was better, everything. And so he and I had been friends for a long time, and I became a senior advisor at Cicero. And Randy and I started talking about building on Cicero's amazing consulting capability, operational and strategic consulting capability, with a private equity arm that would do good, like an impact investing arm that would use Cicero's capabilities. And I said, great, but I'm going to go take this trip with my family first.
Yeah.
So we did this round the world trip. He and I were talking and kind of coming up with plans. And when I got back, we did a big deep dive to figure out what we thought we could do, and decided there was something there. So we started something called Cicero Impact Capital. It's kind of like Bain and Bain Capital, but the capital side was for social good. And we looked, so we eventually invested in a water company in Africa. You helped with a lot of this. We invested in a water company in Africa, a kidney dialysis company in Mexico, and an education company in the United States, and then used Cicero's big brains and capabilities to help try to operationalize and make them better, help them grow, et cetera. So kind of like we had done with microfinance, but now in other sectors.
Yeah.
Basically.
And that was so fun because I remember meeting you actually. I was getting my water bottle filled in my first week. And like anybody that young in their first week, everybody you see, you're like, hi, like, I'm Eric. Like, what do you do? And it was funny because I was like, oh, like, what do you do? Like, oh, well, we have Cicero Impact Capital. We're starting to do this. And it was like, oh, like, I just got done doing investment banking and came here to do consulting. You're like, perfect.
Yeah, we'll take you.
And it was so fun because like from banking where I was, a boutique geographic bank, like, it was, I knew exactly who I was talking to. A lot of family-owned business, but then it was so fun being on the sourcing side at Cicero Impact Capital because I'd be on the phones with an entrepreneur in Africa and maybe someone in Asia or someone in Mexico, and I'd be like speaking in Spanish. Like, it was so fun because you get to learn about all these amazing things that entrepreneurs are doing to solve the problems in their communities, and often like very creative ways to do so. But then also you have this global perspective, and like we work to solve a lot of like the social development goals from the UN and understanding, and just like help me understand the global context better, which no better person to learn it from than Geoff. And
there are, but I was the closest you had.
We'll take it. And so it's such like a unique experience for me to understand like, oh, like there's a lot of good things that we can do throughout all of this and make an impact, still, again, make a return. And some of the people that we worked there were so fun, and seeing those businesses. Like I remember the dialysis network of dialysis clinics in Mexico. Like I didn't know anything about chronic kidney disease or renal failure or dialysis. And the next thing by the end, I'm like, this is a very good thing.
Totally.
So then I know that you're there for a while, and then now, when you pivoted to your current role now as the CEO of Sorenson, and because like if anybody studied finance at the University of Utah, you know all about this because this is one of the internships that is there to give students an opportunity to actually
coveted,
go invest, build some models, actually get hands-on experience from the buy side. But walk me through kind of what you're doing now in this role, how you still get to make an impact and do some of the things that you're most passionate about.
Yeah, it's actually really, really cool. Jim Sorensen, as I mentioned, did some work with us in the microfinance side 20 years earlier. We've been friends for a long time. And so I'd known about the Sorensen Impact Institute. It was Sorensen Impact Center for a long time. We just became an institute last year. Cool. So it's a Sorensen Impact Institute at the business school at the University of Utah. So I'd known about it, and we'd kind of done some things, and in the middle of COVID, so 3.5 years ago, he asked if I would run it. And at first we thought I would do that and keep doing the Cicero Impact Capital stuff. And then, the opportunities here were such that it took full time basically.
Oh, definitely.
And so we made that transition. And the vision is, what we're trying to do is help create a world where the impact of our decisions are integrated into decision making and the broad impact of our decisions. So earlier I was talking about the externalities and whatnot. We're trying to erase that concept and basically say everything has an impact and needs to be recognized and accounted for. And so we're trying to create that world. I personally think that the three biggest levers of change are public policy, public opinion, and capital allocation. And so we're working mostly on the capital allocation side, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But we also do quite a bit of storytelling and communications. But then in terms of thinking long term, if we want that kind of world, we need to train people with the skills and abilities to think that way and to actually operate that way. So what do? We do four things. We do impact investing, and we do that for the Sorensen family. We do that for some other families. We do it for some funds that we've raised ourselves. And that's basically, we find companies that are somehow doing good in the world for people or the planet or both, in addition to making money. So this is a commercial, it's done. We expect financial returns, but we invest in them. And we have a team of professionals that do that, come out of the venture capital industry, et cetera. So that's be 4 or 5 people at any one time, full-time professionals. But we then have about 30, 35 students that are part of the process. They're there as analysts and associates. And so they're the ones staying up till 3 a.m. Creating the model or whatever. But they're also learning how to integrate the impact, the social or environmental impact, into the financial analysis, into the investment decision, et cetera. And the students actually make the investment committee recommendations. So they're coached and everything and overseen by the professionals. But the students are the ones that prepare the decks, that stand up in front of the investment committee and make the proposal, and then take the questions live on this, like we would do, you and I would do. So these are students, going through this. So that's the first thing we do. Second thing, I won't go as deep, but we do impact finance. So that's structured finance. These are former investment bankers that are using structured finance tools and techniques and approaches to solve usually social problems. And we've done some really cool stuff. Maybe I will share one thing, actually.
Please.
So we've done some work around early childhood education, for example, in the Salt Lake area. Let me back up, zoom up, and give an example. We basically figure out ways. I don't know. Hopefully, this doesn't sound too jargony. If it is, we figure out ways to monetize, to make money from. No, not make money from. To get the money for future savings that result in social benefit. For example, if a young child gets the appropriate education now, the state or the county or the city doesn't have to invest as much later in remedial things. If they get the right education, they're less likely to go to juvenile hall.
Yeah, it's like these leading data points.
Exactly.
If we can get education, then there's not going to be early pregnancy or family.
Yeah, exactly. All those types of things. Exactly.
Because it's interesting too, because and just to add on that, one thing I learned in a lot of that due diligence and deal sourcing is access to capital.
Yep.
We're here, we're complaining in the US, we're like, oh my gosh, it's going to cost me 6.5% to get a mortgage. Go to another country and it's 15, 20, totally. 20. So it's interesting to your point. If we can just inject capital in the right places to the right people, going back to some of your earliest work, that can have a beneficial economic impact to a lot of these geographies. And it's probably more, again, a universal principle than you would think. So I love that that's still part of what you're doing.
Exactly. Here's a concrete example. London wanted to convert its buses to CNG, save money and for the environment. They didn't have I'm going to make the numbers up because I don't remember. They didn't have the $30 million that they needed to do that conversion at one time. But their annual fuel costs were, I'm making these numbers up, but $10 million, let's say. And so they knew they could reduce those to $7 million if they go to CNG. So they knew they'd get savings. So this type of transaction says, okay, over the next 15 years, you're going to save this much money, 3 times $3 million times 15. So you're going to save $45 million in order to invest $30 million now. So what we'll do is we'll put together a transaction. We'll borrow the $30 million from investors. Then you can do the transaction to change your buses over, or the transition to change your buses over. And then with the fuel savings, you pay back the investors, right? So you pay, let's say your fuel cost is $7 million. So you pay, you just pay back a little bit each year back to the investors so the investors make money on their 30 million, you save money, City of London saves money, and the environment's better. So that kind of thing. So we've done that for programs that reduce recidivism, which means going back to jail after you've been out of jail.
Yep.
We've done it for programs that reduce child abuse. We've done it for programs that give early childhood education, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So if you take that concept,
Yeah.
it's really, really cool. So anyway, that's the second thing our team does. The next thing we do is we do something called impact measurement and reporting and strategy. So figuring out how to really measure what you're doing. We do that for ourselves. We also do it for other organizations and families and foundations and things like that. And then we do impact storytelling. So I alluded to that. We make all this intellectual stuff compelling and do short videos and infographics and things like that to try to communicate all of this.
Yeah, because I imagine there's a huge piece of all of that that's in just raising awareness.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, let's go back to my example of chronic kidney disease in Mexico. I mean, I didn't even know how big of an issue chronic kidney disease was in Mexico because it's a very geographically impacting thing. Like in the US, we have a semi bad problem just because like American obesity, but we can attribute it to that. But then like Mexico and China like are huge issues with it. And like, again, things I didn't know. But then once I started to know, I'm like, oh, this is why these kidney dialysis clinics are so important. So I imagine that's a big part of that is that storytelling, awareness, recognition,
getting the word out. Exactly.
Totally.
Exactly. So that's the big idea. We do the work. We have about 35 professionals that actually do the work. Then we train on the work. We have about 65 students total that work with us at any one time. And then we talk about the work. So we try to get the story out and have more people copy us. And can I mention something that's really relevant here locally? I know you want to get some local connection. So we're building something amazing. In fact, see that yellow crane right there?
Yes.
Those who are listening, we're looking out a window on the University of Utah campus, and there's a big yellow crane in the middle of campus. We're building something there called the Impact and Prosperity Epicenter.
Oh, really?
So the Impact Epicenter. President Taylor Randall, who's the president of the university, amazing leader, his vision for the university is to become a top 10 public university with unrivaled or unsurpassed societal impact, social impact. So he wants people to think Berkeley, Michigan, Virginia, Utah. Yeah. Right? He wants it at that caliber, that level, but also known for social impact and actually really not in like just a woke, superficial, whatever, but truly doing things that change the world and make the world a better place. And so we're building something called the Impact and Prosperity Epicenter. It's almost a 300,000 square foot building.
Wow.
Costs about $133 million. That's funded in really innovative ways. The university isn't just paying for it. The state isn't just paying for it. Donors aren't just paying for it. So we've structured, everything we do, we've been very thoughtful and structured donors and university money and investment money, and we've bonded for some of it. So, and it's going to house 778 students from first years to graduate students. So it's a community. Yeah. It's beautifully designed. You can go online. If you Google Epicenter, University of Utah, you'll see some drawings, some renderings and things. And so it's 6 floors of residences. I'm purposely not using the word dormitory because it's not that at all. There are apartments. There are condo units. I mean, they're just amazing the way it's built. And then there are 3 floors of office space. So our new headquarters will be in there starting this fall, as well as a sister center called the Center for Business Health and Prosperity. And then there's a cafe, a bunch of seating, like kind of hangout eating space. There's a public forum where we'll do lectures, where we'll do you could do a podcast there, where we'll, show movies, have lectures, book clubs, etc. And then some classrooms and meeting spaces. And as far as we know, it's the first community in the world. It will be the first community in the world dedicated to impact, to using business for social and environmental good. And again, not in a superficial woke capitalism way, but in a truly, meaningful way. And so it's living, it's learning, it's working, it's eating, it's kind of everything dedicated to this. And that's going to be right here in Utah, right. We're literally, if we had a little better arm, we could throw a rock to it.
I know, right?
And I think that's important for people to understand that this is going to be just like Lassonde. Some of you.
I was going to say that's it's like a parallel, but like impact instead of entrepreneurs.
Lassonde is known in the entrepreneurship space. It's known as this super cool place where students, live together, engineers with artists, with whatever, marketers, live together and start a bunch of businesses. The entrepreneurship program here, depending on which ranking you use, is either number 2 or number 4 in the country.
Yeah.
In a large part because of that. So a similar thing will happen with the impact space.
And it's like, I like that these two centers are coming in because like in Lassonde, you think about how much Silicon Slopes and Lehigh has grown. And I mean, if you look at a lot of the articles of, number of entrepreneurs by college, like Utah's all like, it didn't used to be part of the conversation,
Exactly.
but is only more
Very
becoming
much
that
is.
way.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is for Lassonde. And I mean, at least a place where people can go to fill that appetite if they do have it in such an intimate way. Because again, it's similar to what you're describing with the Epicenter, where it's like they live there, they eat there, they thrive there, they work there, they create there.
Totally.
And in the same vein, like kind of going back to one of these like values of Utah's is we do want to make a better place. We do want to help people. And it's not just like these altruistic sayings, but we actually do want to help. And so I love that kind of dovetails really well with, I mean, Utah and Salt Lake within itself of wanting to be impactful and help and live where we stand and leave it better than we found it, of having that to support that growth too. So I love how that it's not just this, let's call it like strategic president of the school saying, if we're going to get more students or more money, we have to do this. It's saying, hey, like, let's do what we say we want to do. Let's do better together and let's help people. It's almost like teach them how to fish as well, but then teach them in these epicenters and have them access to the right people, the right forums and mentors to help them get there. So I love that it's not just this idea of like strategy, but an idea of we are here. This is how we're going to grow. Yeah,
it's amazing. It opens this fall, by the way. And I really think it's going to do a lot. Just like Utah was not necessarily on the entrepreneurial map, not just the University of Utah, but Utah in general. Yeah. And now we have Lassonde, now we have Silicon Slopes. Now you're a part of it, right? Now groups are moving from the Bay Area here, or large numbers of people are, and companies are coming here because it's so vibrant. It's a better way of life. We live where we want to vacation. Yeah. The same thing will happen, I think, on the impact side.
Oh, without a doubt. So I'm excited to see that happening. And we've already seen, I mean, University of Utah, I mean, let's call it pre-Pac-12, like end of 2000s, like it was a school. It was great.
Right.
But then compared to where it is now, it's like, oh, it's actually like a place people want to come and thrive. And so it's like, I see this ambition of Taylor Randall wanting to be one of those top 10 schools. And if you were to ask me when I was in high school, like, yeah, cool, I'm just going to go to the U because everybody goes to the U. But now it's like, oh, like there's the growth and trajectory behind it to be like, that's not such a crazy claim to want to go chase after.
Yeah, exactly. Utah rising.
Exactly. I mean, with Geoff, like besides obviously working here, on campus, helping students, helping, the world become a better place. What else do you like to do in Utah in your spare time with your family?
Oh my gosh. People ask me how I like living in Utah. They know I'm not from here and I've lived all over the world. I threw that phrase out a minute ago, living where we would want a vacation. It's amazing. Yeah. It's amazing. I ski a ton. I bike a ton. We hike. It's phenomenal. We had tons of friends, you probably do too, that moved here during COVID for the same reason. Like, A, I want to get out of New York or San Francisco or LA, and B, I want to be somewhere where I actually want to be, not just endure where I am until I can be where I want to be. Yeah. And I think, just going a little riff on Utah. Utah is so varied. So you drive 2 to 4 hours in any one direction and you're a totally different place. Yeah. The Salt Flats are totally different than the Wasatch Front, Little Cottonwood Canyon, totally different than the Uintas, totally different than Moab, totally different than Zion, totally in St. George. It's just there's so much variety here. It's endless. It feels like a small country, a small European country with a lot of variety or something like that, right?
I see it.
There's so much going on. And I was really surprised. I was a little nervous moving here, frankly. Moving into the heart of Mormondom. And what would that be like? What would our, the influence on our kids and all that? We wanted them to think broadly and, this is without having lived here. I was a student here. Yeah. And so was nervous about stories that I'd heard. They're all fake. Yeah. They're all, not true. I heard stories where my kids couldn't play with other kids because they weren't members of the church or, whatever. But do unfortunately still hear some of that. But for the most part, none of those concerns were, just the opposite. Yeah. And, some people who have this view, kind of like I did about BYU, right? The Mormon Tabernacle Choir piped through the halls. People who haven't been here just think it's some insular place. Not in the slightest. maybe because of the missions, because people go out on missions all over the world. But people are very, very engaged, very aware. It's not this insular place that it's sometimes viewed as at the coast. And, you asked one of the questions, the prep questions, what we like about it here and what keeps us here. It's what I mentioned about the natural beauty. And the second is the people. I mean, the people are really amazing. If you remember the Olympics, the 2002 Olympics, everybody was saying, everybody's so nice. They're honestly nice. They really help. It's true. Yeah. It's true. Good people. Anyway.
No, I echo it all. Like I always love getting the perspective of people who have, quote unquote, traveled the world. Like for you, for example, you've been to probably so many random corners of the country that 99% of people don't even know exist. You've seen some of the biggest issues in the world and seen some of the biggest successes in the world. And also, I can name 4 or 5 guests who've already had that have had similar, probably not the same magnitude of experiences, but then it almost makes them appreciate it more when they are here. It's like, the geography, the diversity in the geography, the niceness of the people, the centralness of again, if you're still traveling a lot for work, having Salt Lake International Airport right
amazing.
There.
Yeah. You can get anywhere. It's almost easier than other places.
Exactly. And so it's so funny because people will always have these conversations about well, I don't know about Utah, or I don't know about this. And a lot of it comes up with the social issues of neighbors and strong culture of Mormon presence. But at the same time, that's not everybody.
No.
And even then it's they're still nice neighbors. I've lived other places where you don't talk to your neighbor, they don't talk to you. And if you do, it's never a good experience. Yeah. Clean place. We have an inversion. We can work on that a little bit, but otherwise it's such a hard place to hate.
Oh, 100%. Can I pick up on the inversion?
Oh, please, of course.
One of the other things you mentioned you wanted to ask about is, what do we need to be thinking about? And I can't remember how you phrased it, but I think 2 things for us to think about are the 2 things that make it great. Mm-hmm. The environment, the natural beauty, and the people. And I think we could be doing more for clean air. I think, the smokestacks that are just right on the other side of Salt Lake that are supposed to have been moved 8 years ago and are getting fined every day for not. I think we could do more to get those somewhere else, as well as other things. Mexico City had a huge inversion problem. They fixed it, made it much better. Yeah. Beijing had a huge inversion problem. It's still not good, but it's much better. Yeah. Beijing and Mexico City can do it. We can certainly figure it out. It's not unknown. And I think we should. And then the Great Salt Lake, I think everybody's aware now. I think that's a huge, it's not just an ecological issue, but it's a huge lifestyle issue for us. It will really change things. So on that front, I think we need to be more thoughtful with our water and our air, much more thoughtful than we have been in the past. And, there's Saturday Night Live, some late night talk show or comedy show or something, had when Governor Cox asked for a day of prayer for water, they were joking. They said, I imagine how that went. God, send us more water. And God's like, no, stop building golf courses in the desert. So there is some truth to that, right? Yes. Notwithstanding the epic year we had last year. So prayer works. And we're hopefully having again this year. So anyway, I just think we can be more thoughtful about that and not destroy what this incredible place that we have. And the second is the people. It's interesting. Probably the farther you get from right about where we're sitting, the more the politics change.
Yes,
right?
Absolutely.
So, Salt Lake was voted. I don't know if this would be something to confirm. I think Salt Lake was named the 2nd hippest city in the world.
I'll take it.
After, I think, Stockholm or something.
Interesting.
Right? They did some measure of independent coffee shops and record shops and however they calculated hip. So Salt Lake is hip. But the farther you go away, the less that matters and the more that's a negative, right? And so we have almost two Utahs.
Yes.
And I think we need to be aware of that demographically, economically, politically, sociologically, all of those things, be aware of it. And I think Governor Cox is doing an amazing job trying to balance these things, frankly. And he's showing a new way of, a Utah form of republicanism. Not that I'm saying we have to be Republican or Democrat, but he's not just, hardcore one way. And so I think just being nice to each other, keep being nice to each other and not let everything be about politics. Yeah. And realize that we have part of the reason that makes Utah amazing is we have a long history of coming together. Yes. Across whatever differences, political or otherwise. And building a ditch when there wasn't a ditcher when people first got here, or building a road when there wasn't a road when people first got here, and whatever, right? We just get stuff done. We come together, we get stuff done. And so not letting the current political polarization infect us like it has the rest of the country. That we can rise beyond that. We can realize that it's really just an echo chamber because of algorithms on our social media, and everything isn't as bad as it sounds, et cetera, et cetera. And we can just continue to see each other as people. Those are my 2 thoughts.
No, I completely agree. The more that we can talk, because like I've yet in my life struck up a conversation with a stranger next to me and been like, oh, I believe in the world less. Like it's always interesting when you hear, I mean, again, like these social media algorithms, these like grand messages, but then like the more you interact with strangers, you realize it's not as true as you want it to be.
Exactly.
And I think that's one thing that's always made Utah really strong is our sense of community. And if we can just hunker down and rely on our community instead of let it, like you said, infect it, then we can continue to stay strong, continue to grow, continue to be this city and solve these big problems because they've been solved before. We can solve it. It's just about prioritizing our energy in the right direction to make sure that we can, because we can't fix everything.
Totally.
But Geoff, I want to end with 2 questions I always ask everybody that comes on. Number 1 is, if you could have someone on the Small Lake City podcast and hear their story, who would you want to have on?
Oh, that's interesting. You want me to name them by name here?
Sure, yeah. Do your thing.
Who would be cool? Jim Sorensen would actually be very cool.
Oh, Jim would be great.
He's an amazing person. Have you talked to Ben McAdams?
No, he'd be another great one.
Who else? I mean, I'm sure you're thinking of a lot of the kind of typical people. Gail Miller would be incredible. Blake Moore. Have you heard of that guy? Have you ever heard? Just kidding.
Once or twice.
Just kidding, Blake. Haven't heard your show yet, but I will. Congressman Moore.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, those are some of the strongest people doing a lot of the coolest things around Salt Lake. So yeah, everybody has a story to tell. And because like that's like the whole like impetus of the podcast is Salt Lake has grown so much. It's become this bigger dot on the map. We see all this growth. Who's doing it and what is their story? So just to be able to help people understand who the faces are, how they got to do it, and hopefully help motivate some other people along the way.
Yeah, cool.
And then secondly, if people want to find out more about you or Sorenson or more about the Epicenter coming up, and where can they find more information?
Thanks for asking. So you can Google Epicenter, University of Utah, and that will bring the Epicenter site, which is a subsite of ours. Or you can look at Sorensen, S-O-N, Sorensen Impact Institute.com or SorensenImpact.com if that's easier, or you can just Google it. There'll be a whole bunch of information there for that.
Perfect. Yeah. So if anybody's curious about Sorenson, wants to come to school here and be one of this first cohorts of Impact, or if you're a student at the U and want to come get some hands-on experience,
we'd love it.
This is the place to be.
There you go. Thanks for doing this, Eric. This is great.
No, thanks for having me on. I love your story. I love your impact, and happy to have you on.
Thanks, my friend.
No, absolutely, boss. Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Small Lake City Podcast. Don't forget to like, follow, review, subscribe, and share this episode with your friends. And we'll catch you next week. We'll see you there.